Hey, we're live. This is the Sound Advice live stream and podcast. Although I don't think I've been uploading it to the podcast. I don't know if you have, Nick, but we're at least a live stream. And so I'm Justin. I go by the moniker DIY Audio Guy on YouTube. This is my buddy Nick right down here below me, who goes by Toys DIY. You still have the Toys DIY forum, don't you?
I do. Yeah, absolutely. Join us for
fantastic.
some great discussion.
Yeah, what's going on the forum these days?
Well, we've been building the cheapest, and we talked about it a little last week. The cheapest, hopefully, that we know of, spinorama. So you don't have to buy $100,000 Clipple, and yeah, Clipple, and we've been doing other. As people have been asking about some speaker designs. Anytime you have a speaker design question, you can bring it over there, ask. Just do those types of things. It's just a really fun place to kind of hang out and chill out and get advice.
Let's say hi to some people. Cornette is here giving us a thumbs up. Cornette is very knowledgeable, has lots of good information. Hello, Bobby Burkett, Bobby B. I can't word tonight. Good to see you there, Marty Jr., Nick. Good to have a good crowd here. Cullen, Luke, Blake V. We got a nice crowd of people here. Steve, good to see everybody. Got a good crowd. We got about 45 people that popped into the stream so far, so that's good.
Frank Garcia. I like that name. I wish I had a cool name like that. That's a cool name.
Yeah, I like that. Andy's here, so we're rocking and rolling here because of the thumbnail.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about that. That wasn't on my mind. So before we get started, Nick, I want to do a little bit of myth busting. So our premise is that we're talking about rules of thumb, rules that people come up with, both in home audio, car audio, really anything. And years ago, I was posting a video and I mentioned, here's a rule of thumb in the video. And someone jumped into the comments and said some stuff that was like really weird. Apparently that term rule of thumb is based on a concept of domestic abuse.
I never heard that.
So apparently that there's an old English law that says you're allowed to beat your wife as long as the stick you use to beat your wife is smaller than your thumb as a diameter or, radius or I did a little digging into that, and that story that it's some kind of wife beater thing is completely untrue. There never has been any law anywhere at all that said that. El Fuego, good to see you.
That said, El Fuego, good to see you. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Honestly, like that's crazy. Like even if that was a true law at some point in time, I'm glad that I don't live in that society nowadays.
And, I don't know where it came from, but I'm not aware of any legal tradition in the United States that that contributed to that. So rule of thumb, its origin is just what it sounds like. You're doing a measurement, you stick your thumb out and go, close enough. That's the idea behind rule of thumb. So let's jump right into it. Why don't we do a couple of rules of thumb? And so this one here, Nick, is one.
These rules of thumbs are things. The rules of thumbs that we're going to go over are things that you've probably heard, and some of it you may have taken as fact, meaning I need to do this, and some of it's just not entirely accurate. So some of this might even sound like myth busting when we're not really doing that. We're just saying, hey, this is probably the rule of thumb that you've heard. This is where it comes from. Maybe it's a good idea to follow, but it's not necessarily the end all be all, right?
Exactly. All right. So here's our first rule of thumb, Nick. You can read it off the screen if you want to.
Your tweeter crossover point or your high pass filter, we're assuming like a two-way system usually, needs to be 2 times FS. And your FS is the resonant frequency of that particular tweeter.
Wait a second. I didn't know tweeters had a resonance frequency. Well, yeah, I did. I just thought I'd talk about it. What do you mean by the resonant frequency of a tweeter?
Well, whenever you go to a website like Parts Express or wherever you buy your drivers from, you're going to see the FS typically listed for the tweeter. And so if you got like a 3/4 inch tweeter, a 1/2 inch tweeter would have a higher FS than a 3/4 inch tweeter. And a 3/4 inch tweeter would have a higher FS than like a 1 inch tweeter. Each one would typically have a lower FS if the bigger you go. And that resonant frequency is what a lot of people will say is you want to double that. So if your resonant frequency of your tweeter was say 1200 hertz, then they'd say you don't want to cross over your tweeter any lower than 2400 hertz. So 1200 times 2. So multiply your FS by 2. And this comes from a couple different things. One that typically we got to understand what they're talking about as far as the crossover, what type of crossover we're talking about, because there's different orders of crossover, right? First order,
Right.
second order, third order, fourth order. And each one of those are going to have a steeper slope. So when we talk about this, know first of all that they're typically talking about a second order crossover. Okay. So for a tweeter, that would be a capacitor and an inductor. And so if you have a 1200 hertz crossover, 1200 hertz FS tweeter, then 2400 hertz would be that. And sometimes that's a really good thing to follow, especially if you're beginning. Actually, when people begin, I usually tell them to follow this rule. But when you start measuring tweeters, you're going to find out that some of those actually could cross over a little earlier, and some of them should be crossed over later because
when you
there's
say
too much
earlier
distortion in
versus
the tweeter.
later, do you mean lower or higher when you say earlier versus later?
So when I say earlier, I mean lower in frequency, and when I say later, I mean higher in frequency. But yeah, and so you'll want to eventually do more testing of that. Test your distortion, test your waterfall graphs, test these types of things so that you get an idea of exactly how that tweeter is responding. And then the other thing is, what order crossover are you doing? Because if you're doing a third order, guess what? You can cross over lower in frequency.
You know, this is really handy information for those of us who run our DSPs in our cars. If you've got that fourth order DSP, like so many of these DSPs have the ability to do, it kind of changes that rule a little bit. You can cross over at a lower frequency.
Yeah, exactly. So if you go with a higher order, it's going to be more expensive on components unless you're doing DSP, but it will typically allow you to cross over a little bit later. I still tell you, though, when you get more advanced in crossover design, you're going to want to probably pay attention to the distortion and other things that'll really depend on where you want to cross over. So for example, I had a tweeter by CSS. You can actually watch the video. There's a video that I talk about this, where I talk about behind the scenes of the Epic Hi-Fi build. Okay. So more of the technical breakdown is what I called it. Technical breakdown of the Hi-Fi, Epic Hi-Fi. And that particular video, for example, the frequency response is super flat, all the way down to like 1000 hertz. So you're thinking, well, I should cross this over easily. 1 kilohertz done. But you start seeing the distortion rise. I think it's about 15 or 1800 kilohertz, somewhere in that range. You can watch the video and you'll see exactly where, which tells us that we need to cross over sooner than that, because that distortion we want to get down. And so the crossover, you want that down more. So even though it looks good, not necessarily true.
So I want to do a little audience participation. So I'm going to put up another one of these rules of thumb. And what I would like is a thumbs up in the chat if you follow this rule of thumb, or a thumbs down in the chat if you don't follow this rule of thumb. Or maybe if you follow the rule of thumb, hit the like button so that more people will see that we got a live stream going on. Because when you hit that like button, it actually does have an impact in the spread on YouTube. I'm not sure how it works everywhere else. I'm also streaming this to my Facebook page. I can see we got one Facebook viewer, and I'm also streaming it to Twitter, aka X, and nothing there yet. I don't think anyone's watching over there. So here is the next rule of thumb. Give me a like button or just a thumbs down in the chat what you think about this one. So when you're setting your gain on your amplifier, you want to turn your head unit up to 75% of the head unit's maximum volume. So Nick, what do you think about this rule of thumb?
You know, it's interesting that you say this, because this is actually very similar to home audio as well, in the essence that if you have an amplifier on your desk, two things you should never do. One, set your computer gain all the way to 100%, turn it up to 75. That's your preamp, right? And then same with the amplifier. Never turn it past 75% because things go wonky. And it is definitely a rule of thumb that you hear a lot. I don't care if it's car audio or home audio. What do you think about it?
I'm seeing some thumbs up. I'm seeing some thumbs down. I think Adrian Bauer's super chat right here is a really good way to conceptualize it. It's a good rule of thumb for matching the amplifier RMS power to the subwoofer RMS power, and good for beginners. So what I've run into my own experience with this is when I did probably one of the first videos that really had any traction on my channel was setting your gains with a multimeter. And the rule of thumb for setting the gains with a multimeter is to set your head unit, like your factory head unit or your aftermarket head unit, up to 75% of its maximum value. And this rule of thumb is just that. It's a crude shortcut. The problem is you don't know where it's going to clip unless you have slightly better testing gear. And yes, you can, if you know the pre-volt output, if it's say a 4-volt output or something like that, you can turn it up until you get 4 volts and it should be clean at that point. So this is a great tool when using a multimeter. If you have, as Cornut's mentioning it on the chat, if you've got a DD1 or an oscilloscope or more advanced tools, you really don't need it. So it's a good rule of thumb when you don't have a lot of really high-end tools to do this. But the thing I kept running into is people would say, hey, I'm following all your instructions and I can't get my amp up to the correct voltage. Well, okay, what does that mean? That means you got to turn that head unit up to maybe 80%, maybe 85, because it's just a rule of thumb. It's really the weak point in that whole multimeter set the gain method. And that's my opinion on that.
And we've both, I think, you've done a video on it. I did not do a video on it, on that cheap oscilloscope that works really well. It's an oscilloscope / multimeter. And that thing would be good to start setting your gains up, because what we're talking about, for those that don't know, is once you start clipping your amplifier or your speakers in any way, shape, or form, that's when you start doing damage to your speakers in the long haul. So you want to really make sure that you're not clipping. And I think that's really where the 75% came from, is to try to make sure that you're not clipping everything. And I think, like a lot of people said, it's a good rule of thumb to follow if you don't have any equipment, you don't have anything. It's not necessarily a bad thing to follow, but there's better ways to do it.
Right. And I think Stu's got a comment right here I'm going to throw up real quick. A lot of times you can hear the head units when it starts to peak. Your ears are ultimately the ultimate test gear. All the test gears are great. Use all the test gear. What I find is that when I have test equipment, I can learn what it sounds like when it sounds bad. It's like, oh, that's what clipping sounds like. That horrible noise I've been listening to my whole life. I didn't know that till I could see it on the meter. That makes a big difference. So
unfortunately, though, a lot of people equate clipping to loudness.
Right. That's very
They're just like, it's getting really loud. And it's like, no, it's getting really bad.
Right.
I do like, if you don't mind me showing this.
Yeah.
How many of you just checked your PC volume? I did. That's awesome, City Jenkins.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm a fan of using an oscilloscope, and if I can get my hands on a link to that cheap oscilloscope quickly, I'll do that. I don't want to pull up too much internet, because if I do that, my internet will crash.
Yeah.
But that's good. So all right. So once again, we're going to do another one. Nick, I'm going to put it up on the screen. Once again, everybody in the chat, this is it's a rule of thumb. Maybe it's a myth people have said, and it's Nick, so it's one he brought to the show. So thumbs up if you agree or endorse the rule of thumb. Thumbs down if you disagree. So tell us in the chat what you think about it.
A 3-way system sounds better than a 2-way system. There's a lot of rules here that, and some of this might even be considered more myth than a rule of thumb, but a lot of people will say that, hey, a 3-way system sounds better than a 2-way system. And then that's the end of it, right? So doesn't matter what 3-way, doesn't matter what 2-way. 3-way is better than 2-way, point blank. What do you think about that, Justin?
I know that when I took my 3-way front stage out of my truck and switched to a 2-way front stage, I do not believe that the sound quality dropped.
That's a good way. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. So here's the deal. A 3-way can sound better than 2-way. It's really interesting. I was just talking to Bennett Prescott at B&C Speaker Group. So if you're familiar with B&C Speaker Group, which most people are, you should probably know who Ben is. I actually just did an interview with him on the channel. You should check it out if you guys haven't seen that. Really good. They're coming out with a new compression driver that's like tiny and louder than other. I mean, it's a brand new technology. It's pretty cool. But here's the problem with a 3-way system that a lot of people don't realize, especially in DIY. So it's significantly more complicated to design a good 3-way system versus a good 2-way system. A lot of people think, well, maybe it's twice as hard. No, it's a lot harder. And that was something like Bennett had even said. He's like, it's like tenfold harder to design a good 3-way system than a 2-way system. And you got to think about that, especially when you're buying speakers, because like, for example, car audio and home audio is the same way. If you buy a really cheap 3-way system, it is almost guaranteed to not have a great crossover on it that's designed properly. And there's nothing saying anything bad about that. But if that's the case, the 2-way is going to kill it every time, assuming the 2-way is obviously designed properly.
Yeah, I think that's what the Social Club Studio is saying, and that really comes down to it. What are your thoughts on this comment that it's rare that you can truly play 20 to 20 with only 2 drivers?
I would say that was a lot more truer 5 years ago than it is today.
And I want to add a qualifier to this.
Because there's a couple things well, go ahead. You give your qualifier and then I'll give mine.
My qualifier, in my mind, when I see this rule of thumb, I'm assuming there's a subwoofer already, right? This is not the right. There's already a subwoofer. I'm assuming you've got a subwoofer because I mean, come on, we're subwoofer people here, right?
Well, I mean, I do agree with Blake though. In general, it's rare that you can truly play 20 to 20K with 2 drivers. I do agree with that as advice as a whole, but I don't think it's impossible. Especially when we talk about room gain, cabin gain, talk about extended base shelf filters, these types of things where you can get it down low at what do we talk about? Plus or minus 3 decibels, what do we, so we got to kind of almost qualify that question. Are we talking plus or minus 10, plus or minus 3? Are we talking, but I do agree in general. It's very hard to do that.
So Nick, I got a related question. So assuming there's a subwoofer, I think that's a given. Several people have commented and mentioned that in the comments again. So I'll say that there's a subwoofer, right? There has to be. What are your thoughts on the idea of having, say, your subwoofer and then say a 6.5-inch driver, maybe in your bookshelf speakers or in your car, and then instead of an actual tweeter, like a 3.5-inch, I think middler is the word they use over on the Kicker channel, and just not trying to play above 15,000 hertz? What are your thoughts on that?
I think mainly that's done in vehicles. In home audio, that's less likely. Here's the deal. I'm not a big fan of that for a lot of reasons. I can understand why you might want to do that in car versus home. In home, I don't want to do that because a 3-inch driver's off-axis dispersion pattern's pretty horrific, really. There's some instances where I think that would be fine. Actually, the Dynas are one of those instances. Typically, if they're near field, I don't care as much. But far field, not for me. So that's probably my first thoughts on it. What about you?
My first thought is I'm getting old. I don't think I can hear above 15,000 hertz.
Yeah. I mean, there is that thought process, which I can understand that.
And what size are the drivers in your build that you've been working on with the 3D print, the rule breaker? What size are those drivers?
2-inch, maybe something like that.
2-inch. So it works with a 2-inch, but not a 3.5. So that's
it's a different technology. You got to remember that because that's a BMR technology, and the BMR technology has amazing off-axis response, even better than like a 3/4-inch tweeter. So, it's one of those things that's a completely different style driver. But I'm assuming you're talking mainly like a full range driver, like the Dayton RS series or something like that. In which case,
the little RS, 95, PS 95, RS 95,
PS 95. PS 95.
Yeah, both are full range. Yeah.
Yeah, they're both full range.
The RS is the aluminum cone with the aluminum face plug, the black face plug, and the other one has the copper face plug.
It's the RS 100-408. They're the black ones with the face plug in the middle, and then the PS 95 is the copper one with the inverted surround. Yeah, to me, not a huge fan of doing that. However, I will say this, now that I say it, compression drivers often drop off after 15 to 17 kilohertz. So you do have that as well. And most of the time, you're not going to 20 kilohertz with a compression driver. And listen to this. All right. You're going to get a kick out of this. We've been talking about SVS recently, and I like SVS. I've said that on the channel, and I still stand behind that. I had a guy come that's a friend of my son. It was my son's birthday, actually today, but we celebrated this weekend. And he came over and he wanted to hear my theater. So I played it for
Yeah.
him, moderate volume, all compression drivers, PA style stuff, right? All my design, there's Eminence 15s and some BTS 15s and some Cinema 10s and some other stuff in there. And two 21-inch subwoofers. I played him a scene in Maverick, and he said, "Oh my gosh, this is so good and so clear, and it's not even loud." And he could feel it all. And he said, "Man, I just have an SVS system at home, but this is so much better." I felt so good. I was like, "Wow, thanks." I did not expect him to say that.
That's kind of why you do it, though, right?
I do. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly why I do it. But it was nice to have someone that has his own system that he spent a lot of money on, that he likes, and was like, "This is so." I'm saying that because they don't really go past probably 17 kilohertz. So
Gotcha.
he didn't mind.
All right. So I got another one for you. Someone mentioned this in the chat, and I would love to know your perspective. But once again, in the chat, give me hit the like button if you're down with this rule of thumb, and just give me a thumbs down in the chat, or you can do a thumbs up in the chat, whatever you want to do. What do you think about this one right here? Let me get this banner out of the way.
You need 12 to 16 square inches of port area per cubic foot of box volume. This is interesting because this is more car audio than home audio. So I really want to refer to you on this one.
So I'm kind of wanting to see what people in the chat say before I get deep into it. So I've had some conversations with a few people. Blake is in the chat, for example, and I struggle to find an authoritative source that verifies this number, or someone who gives like a formula or data from testing to support this number. From what I gather, the best testing that's been done is done by Digital Designs. And apparently the guy who started Digital Designs did a whole bunch of testing and found that there is some relationship. You need a certain amount of port area for each cubic foot. And I disagree with it because I don't see the proof of it. And so I don't really think this is true. But on the flip side of that, if you look at prefabricated subwoofer boxes, if you look at a lot of home audio subwoofer boxes, a lot of times ports are just too small. And if you actually go, especially the upper end of this 16 square inches of port area per cubic foot of box volume, you end up with huge port openings. And as the port opening gets bigger, well, what happens to the port, Nick?
Longer,
exactly. So I don't know what to make of this. It's not a rule of thumb I've ever followed. What do you do when you decide how big to make the port opening?
16 inches of port area in the opening, not the whole length.
Correct. Yes, the cross sectional area.
Opening. Interesting. I've never heard this one before. So yeah, I mean, I obviously design it in WinISD, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this when we talk about our actually can we just skip to that one, because I think they go hand to hand.
You want to skip to one that's related? Let me see if
the 17 meters a second one, because I think these go hand in hand.
Second one. Yeah, I think they do. I just got a little bit of I got like 3 monitors going, and I just got to find. There we go. This is, once again, everybody, once you see it pop up on the screen, give me a thumbs up, give me a thumbs down. Tell me what you think about this rule of thumb right here.
So port airspeed velocity should not exceed 17 meters per second. So typically when I'm designing a subwoofer, there's a couple things that I want to think about when I'm designing this. There's 3 main things. One, what's your port velocity? And we're going to talk about it exceeding, because I feel like it goes with, the actual size of the port. 2, what's your first port resonance? Which I guess I could have done something on that. And then 3, 3 is your high pass. So let's talk about those 3 things. Whenever you do a ported subwoofer, you're going to need a high pass, right? And that protects the subwoofer from over excursion after port tuning. So if we're tuning at 20 hertz, we're probably going to stick a high pass around 20 hertz. The number one thing that I see a lot of people don't do when they're designing a subwoofer in something like WinISD is they don't take into account your high pass filter. Now, WinISD allows you to put a filter in. You just go to the bottom left-hand side, you click on filter, add a high pass, and then you add whatever order high pass you're going and at whatever frequency you're going to be putting that at. That will change your rear port velocity on your graph in WinISD. So make sure to do that first, because that's going to make a huge impact on that. Now, having said that, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be looking at that, and then I'm going to be looking at my wherever I'm going to cross over at. Like if I'm crossing over at 70 or 80 hertz or whatever, then I also want to look to see if the first port resonance is higher, like twice that. So if I'm crossing over at 80, then I want my first port resonance to be at least at 160. Those are some rules that I try to follow when I'm doing that. But I'm gonna put it in there and figure out what size port I need for that.
So you're going to jump into WinISD to make your decision, and you're looking at a lot of different things.
Well, to start my decision, I mean, once I build it, it might change, alter some, but yes,
that's reasonable. So back to like the airspeed velocity question. And I was busy looking something up because people were asking for a link to something. So I'm going to go ahead and if I've covered ground you've already covered, I'm sorry about that. So 17 meters per second. This is done to prevent chuffing. Do you think you always have to keep your port airspeed velocity below 17 meters per second?
Not at all. I'm curious what I know you don't believe that either. I'm curious what you think first.
Well, I thought this for a really long time. And then one day I'm just digging around and looking at WinISD and realizing that in order to keep that port airspeed velocity below 17 meters per second, I'm going to end up with massive ports. And, as the port opening gets larger, the port gets longer. And it's like, how the heck am I going to fit this massive port in this, 1.5 cubic foot enclosure? And so I started digging around some more, stumbled across a post on the DIY mobile audio forums where someone said, yeah, if you're like really pushing into sound quality and sound quality super important and the most important thing, and you just want no chuffing whatsoever, sure, go with 17 meters per second. And, but they said, but the reality is you could probably go up to 30 meters per second for like a daily driver. And if you were into the SPL thing, probably 40, 50, or even 60. And so what are your thoughts on going up to 30 meters per second?
Not handy. I like what Trump Eats Cats said. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's his name. Flared port will decrease chuffing. That's actually accurate as long as the flare is on both sides. Okay. So when we talk about flare ports on both sides, we're talking about the exit side and also the entrance side. Okay. So both sides of the cabin, if you have flared port on both sides, it can, and you can go all the way up to 32 meters a second typically and not have any issues. Now, I'm not going to say you'll always not have issues. Once again, these are rules of thumb. So you could go up to 32 with flared port. Now, the other thing to think about is which way is your port facing? This is something that a lot of people don't pay attention to. If your port is facing forward, you are much more likely to hear chuffing than if your port is facing rearwards. So if you're having an issue building your box and you're like, I don't know, and you're building like a speaker or something of that nature, you can always put it backwards and it's less likely that you're going to hear it.
Yeah, I think Stu's got a good point, having it in the trunk. And I know that a lot of home audio speakers and subwoofers will put their port on the back of the enclosure, right? Woofer firing forward, port firing back, or port even firing down, specifically so you don't hear any chuffing as bad.
Now, there's one other thing that a lot of people don't pay attention to when you're looking at that graph, like we're assuming WinISD, because you're designing this, right? Where is it chuffing? At what frequency?
Correct. Because that is something you got to look at as well.
Because if it's 17 meters a second and under everywhere except at 18 hertz, how often are you playing 18 hertz?
I mean, every time I say no one plays stuff that low, 1,000 people jump in the comments and say, I do it all the time. I like my big windy build. But if you just like your big windy build, you don't care if it's chuffing. It's fine.
But that's not even the point of what I'm making is if you're not playing 18 hertz a lot, if you're saying, maybe I'll play it every once in a while, then maybe you can live with it going over that. So think about that too. But the biggest problem that I see with people building them is not putting a subsonic filter or high pass filter on in WinISD and modeling it that way, because your chuffing goes down significantly when you do that.
And I think there's a comment that I just saw, and there's a rule of thumb to go with it. If I can find it real quick in my list of rules of thumbs that I have on our list. Here we go. And I want to say it was, let's see if I can find the comment first. Sean Lynn mentioned this. Hey, Sean. Sean follows me on Facebook and everything, and it's always so awesome to connect with Sean. There's so many knowledgeable people inside this. So what about a rule of thumb for a subsonic filter, aka an infrasonic filter? Technically, we should call it infrasonic, right? Because subsonic means slower than the speed of sound. Infrasonic is below the human range of hearing. So let me see if I can get this to work again. I've got multiple screens going on because I'm trying to do things fancy here, and it's beginning to be not worth the trouble. All right. So it is a list of one of my rules of thumb, and I would like to know your opinion on this one, Nick, because you were just saying to jump into WinISD and use a high pass filter, which is an infrasonic filter. And did it just crap out? Yeah, it just did.
It did. But you said half an octave below your port tuning. So if you're tuning as 20, then you put it at 10, or you put
that
it at
is
15?
The idea.
No, so half an octave, so it'd be at 15.
So half an octave below your tuning frequency. So if you're tuned at 40, an octave before, just picking 40 to make the math easy, right? You wouldn't tune a subwoofer at 40. You might
30.
tune up something else. So if your tuning frequency, if your FB frequency of the box is 40 hertz, 1 octave below that is 20, and half octave below that is 30. So what the math is, just multiply the tuning frequency by 0.75.
So here's the deal. It's a rule of thumb. Once again, use WinISD to look at it, because there's two graphs that you're going to want to look at in WinISD. First graph you're going to be looking at, first of all, make sure you go into your signal tab in WinISD and put the wattage you think you're going to be giving it. And then you're going to go to your tab for your rear port air velocity, right? Which we just talked about. And then the other tab that you want to go to is your excursion tab, right? Your Xmax tab. What is, is it going to be dying? And you set the Xmax in there, so you can put the mechanical, you can put whatever number you want in there to a certain degree. But yeah, those are the two I'd look at. And if it's settling over that, either Xmax or whatever max airspeed that I want, then I'm going to set it up higher or steeper. Because what are they talking about? Second order, first order, third order, eighth order?
I'm assuming second order for the rule of thumb. When I read the rule of thumb, I didn't notice what order it was. And again, if you're doing a fourth order slope, you can probably push that crossover point lower down in the frequency. And of course, the reason why you do it is to keep your subwoofer from unloading. So do you need to do this with a sealed enclosure, Nick?
Typically, you don't need to put any type of high pass on. That's one of the things why I love sealed enclosures. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more and a little bit later. But yeah, one thing that a lot of people don't realize either, and this is something that you should probably keep in mind, if you put a high pass at 20 hertz, for example, wherever it is, it's not like it goes 20 hertz and then it starts off like, depending on the order, it might start off at like 30 hertz and start going down.
Right.
And so you will lose some low end bass by just running a high pass. So you do want to check that out. Unfortunately, some DSPs, etc., have set limits of where you can set your high pass. It's 30 hertz, 20 hertz. And 20 hertz is typically the lowest on most ones that are set, by the manufacturers.
And what you were mentioning about the crossover being a slope instead of a cliff, that's something a lot of people don't realize. So if someone's listening and they're new to this, or if you know someone who's new, kind of share it with them so they can learn this. That crossover point is, at least for a first order crossover, it's the 3 dB down point, which means at some point above your low pass frequency, you were down 1 dB and then down 2 dB, et cetera, et cetera. And the crossover point is down 3 dB. And then as you get lower than the crossover point, you're down 4 dB. You go down lower further, you're down 5 dB. Lower further, you're down 6 dB. And like, for example, I've had people comment on my channel, hey, I can still hear voices coming out of my subwoofer, even though I've got a crossover turned on. It's like, well, some low, really low sounding musicians and stuff with low bass voices. Yeah. If you don't have a very steep slope, it'll get right through that filter and you can hear it. So it's not a wall, it's a slope.
I do think that's a pretty good rule of thumb if you don't have a way of modeling it, because that is typically where your unloading is going to be bad.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Unfortunately, it's just not always possible either.
And the other thing you can do is just when you're playing the really low frequencies, just turn it down. Turn the volume knob down so you don't unload. That's just, and it's not a problem if you're just playing like regular music, but if you're doing rebase stuff, EDM music, really the fun stuff that we enjoy, the reason why you have subwoofers, right? If you're playing any of that, you might need it. But if you're just average person who enjoys their music in their car and a shop hooked your stuff up, you don't need to worry about it.
It is something to think about because it does affect your low end bass.
Yeah. All right. You want to do another one of these?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
I'm loving these things.
This has been
By
fun.
the way, if you're enjoying these, put a thumbs up because I want to know. I'm enjoying it.
If we should do this again, let us know because this is kind of fun. I
like it.
I've never done it turn down. What's that? Right. Okay. Let's see if I can add this again.
I swore we were going to get, what is that? Turn down for what? That song.
Oh goodness. All right.
I honestly don't. I can't think of who sings that. Adrian Bowers
sure
really likes it.
Okay, like the rules of thumb and the myth busting kind of thing. My complicated setup out here with multiple screens.
We're getting a lot of thumbs.
All right, so
that's okay. If you could read it too, if you can't pull it up.
All right, here we go. All right, bam! Technology is not my friend tonight. Okay, I've heard this said countless number of times. I've lost track of the number of people I've read online, read in forums, read on Facebook, I've seen on YouTube where people said that VAS is the maximum enclosure size. So before we answer this, first of all, again, if you agree or disagree, thumbs up or thumbs down, let us know. Tell us in the chat. If we see something funny, we'll probably share it. Mm-hmm. First of all, Nick, what is VAS?
Well, I want to add something to this.
Sure.
Before I do. So VAS is the maximum enclosure size is one that I hear. And closely tied to this, which I think we could do at the same time, is that FS should be the tuning frequency.
Oof. Okay. Yeah. Let's
or don't tune below FS is another one. Don't tune below your resonant frequency.
Getting a lot of thumbs down in the chat. Everyone in the chat is giving us a thumbs down. So this is interesting.
I'm curious I want to hear what they say.
What do they say in the chat? So
why are they giving that thumbs down?
Adrian just hates it. So that's it. He just hates it. Blake's always going to give us some good information. Most high power 12s have a VAS well below 1 cubic foot, and 12s do better in boxes that are bigger than that. Thumbs down on the FS comment.
Oh, yeah.
Right,
Stu,
right.
Stu. Well, then that must be wrong.
I trust Stu. If Stu is saying thumbs down, then I'm going to go with Stu.
I think this comes down to an overarching rule of thumb is whatever measurement that we're talking about as far as speaker deal small parameters, they're getting a thumbs down to these. And I think that's a really good question. Stu says a good point. VAS is the point where the box starts having an effect on the compliance. That's the CMS. Correct. So both of these are just wrong. I mean, I don't really know what to say about it because I don't even like the idea of a rule of thumb with either one of these because they're just not accurate statements. I feel like these are almost more myths than rules of thumbs. FS especially, there's some drivers that you're going to get in. Jeff Bagby actually said it. Late Jeff Bagby said it probably best where he's like, hey, you know what? Some drivers are going to tune better below FS. And some drivers are going to tune better above FS. And some are going to tune right at FS. But, you have to take in all of the Thiel small parameters to be able to make those judgments. You can't just pick one and run with it and think this is the end all be all. It's not going to be that. Same with
Right.
box size, right? Some are going to be above VAS, some are going to be below VAS. It's just the way it is. But you need to take all of these into account. You can't just pick one of them.
So VAS, I always pronounce it VAS. I don't know. I have no idea what VAS stands for. I'm assuming the V stands for volume, and I think the AS stands for air suspension. That's my best guess.
Yeah.
I could be wrong. I've not read the original papers from from Thiel and Small, so I don't know for sure. So the VAS is a measure of compliance, and it's related to the CMS, which is also a measure of compliance. And so super chat. I'm distracted here. So, all right, Miguel throws in the super chat. So that's the one thing we let have an interruption. Really enjoying the content. Waiting on SDK box for 410s and an 05 RAM. If you think lithium will be better, decide wire run or just frame. So I ran my ground to the frame. I drilled a hole kind of in the floorboard of the truck and ran the ground to the frame, and it's working fine as far as I can tell. I never know for sure where the best place to ground things are, but the frame did the trick for me. And I hope that you enjoy that. 410s in an 05 RAM is a lot of subwoofers in a very tight spot. So I hope that sounds good. I've heard good things about SDK boxes. Have you heard good things about them, Nick?
No, I don't hear anything about anyone.
Okay. They're car audio boxes.
No, I have. Scott is a great, we like Scott. I'm sure they're amazing. I have not personally heard them. They look great. He does a great job seeing them. So I'm sure they're awesome. I've never personally heard one, so I can't say anything about it.
Gotcha. So back to the VAS question. So that's the volume of the air suspension. Quick. Okay.
Can I take a moment to just say something to Danny? Danny said Nick is awesome. And I'm assuming he's talking to me, but I'm going to take it as me, even if you're not talking about me, just for a minute, because I just want you to know I really needed that today. I've been having a really, really rough day, and that just meant a lot to me today. So sometimes even us, and I'm going to probably cry, some of us like, man, honestly, my YouTube channel has not been doing as good as I've been wanting it to. And sometimes I wonder why I'm doing this. So just confirmation like that, you don't know what people are having their type of days. So I just want you to know that it meant a lot to me. And if you weren't talking to me, I don't need to know, because it meant a lot to me either way. So I really do appreciate that. And I'm sorry for taking an aside for that, but thank you.
You're the only Nick here, and you are awesome. So give us a thumbs up if you think Nick is awesome. You're a wealth of information. You're always willing to share your information. I've always liked the way you don't gatekeep the knowledge. You don't have any problem sharing what you know with everybody. And so give us a thumbs up if you think Nick's awesome, everybody. Come on.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
Appreciate it.
So
I really did. I needed that today. So thanks.
So VAS is a way to quantify how stiff the suspension is. And so quantifying how stiff the suspension is not correlated with what size box that you need. And I was tinkering around in WinISD with some Savard subwoofers, and the Savard Wrap 12, the VAS is close to 1 cubic foot. I'm going to put it in a 2.5 cubic foot box like virtually every other 12 that I ever designed. That seems to be the sweet spot every time I design a 12. So I think that it's not only a bad rule of thumb, I think it's a myth. And if someone has evidence to the contrary, I would love to hear it, because if I'm wrong on this, I actually want to know. Being wrong's not fun, but it's just part of it. Now back to the FS. So Nick, the FS is the free air resonance of the speaker. We talked about that with the tweeter, right? And so there is a rule of thumb that you're supposed to tune your box when tuning a ported enclosure to the FS. I've never done that. In fact, the Savard build that I just did, I made a whole big deal out of the fact that it was tuned super low. The FS on that thing is like 60 hertz. And I've got it tuned to like 35 or 36, and sounded good. It worked fine. Had a weird impedance plot in WinISD, but that's what it's supposed to do.
And I think this also ties into another rule of thumb that we have, which is that you should be, when you're designing a box, whether it be a subwoofer or speaker, whatever, that you should be going for a Chevy Chev alignment. So there's different alignments that you can make your subwoofer box, including extended bass shelf of 3 decibels, extended bass shelf of 6 decibels. There's even super boom box. And so a lot of this actually goes right into this because you're not tuning to FS with those other ones either. So as Super Boombox, you're going to be tuning typically above FS because you want that 3 to 6 decibel bump. And I think that's great, by the way. Super Boombox is great for people that are trying for SPL competitions, for people that have near field monitors that just really want that bass hitting. Those are great. Like there's different designs, port designs, depending on what you're doing. Extended bass shelves are some that I really wish more people would do, especially with bigger subwoofers, like 21 inch, 18 inches. Extended bass shelves are fantastic because there's a lot of these that you could get down -3, -6 decibels if you're going ported to like 15, 17 hertz, especially for home theater. And the reason why that's so important is because once you pass your tuning frequency on a ported box, you're not going to gain much room gain. Okay. But if you can extend that bass response down further for -3 or -6 decibels, get that low end, then you will get some room gain to pull that back up, or cabin gain to pull that back up. And then you can DSP some of the higher part down if you need to. So for me, those extended bass shelves, especially with the size woofers that we have now, are not used enough. And I think they should be. And that's especially important if you want to do a hi-fi speaker that you want to go low, but you want to make sure you don't have over bloated bass. You can also do an extended bass shelf. There's a couple speakers companies I know that do that because they want as flat of a response in the room as on the bass end instead of that bloated 100 hertz on down.
So what do you think about this comment here? I have no idea the difference between Chevy Chef, Butterworth, etc. I don't think I know either. So if Nick knows the difference, that would be handy to know.
I'll explain 3. I'll explain extended bass shelf, Chevy Chev, and Super Boombox. Okay, so Super Boombox would give you a hump in the frequency response that you're. So, all right, let me explain it like this. All right, typically, I'm going to start with Chevy Chev because this is easiest. Okay, Chevy Chev is going to go as straight along without having any effects in the frequency response, like 100 hertz going down, 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 and then all of a sudden have a gentle roll off to 3 decibels. Okay, so it'll be flat until the roll off. That's
it'll
it.
Get down pretty
Chevy
deep
Chev.
too. So flat, and it's a pretty rapid drop off too. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep. And anytime you're going ported is going to be a rapid drop off. Now, a Super Boombox says, all right, let's tune it a little bit higher. So the Chevy Chev is going to tune lower. So we're going to tune it higher in frequency. But by doing that, we're going to get a hump in our bass response. Okay. So our bass response now is going to go flat, 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 hump up, and then back down. So then if you're really trying to accentuate, say like 50 or 60 hertz, like that good mid bass that kicks you in the gut, you could get that Super Boombox shelf in there. And then how high you want that to go up is dependent on how you're tuning that, right? So you might be able to go really high or really low. That's also really good for those that want to do SPL competitions if they know where they're trying to tune to. You know, if they want to try to get higher SPL at that current frequency. Now, extended bass shelf will go flat and then it'll start dropping sooner, okay, than a Chevy Chev, but it'll extend down much, much further in frequency. So it's -3 decibels. So there's extended bass shelf, -3 and -6. So -3 decibels, say you're tuning currently at like 30 hertz with a Chevy Chev, -3 might be at 20 hertz, but it'll be a shallower roll off, right? And then it'll hit that extended bass shelf. So you're extending the bass. 6 decibels is the exact same thing, but instead of being 3 decibels down, it's 6 decibels down. So you can extend your bass even further, maybe now down to 10 hertz. And then you can extend it following that. Now, the downsides of extended bass shelf is your bass at the lowest frequency is down either -3 decibels or -6 decibels. The advantage with a ported design is that when with a Chevy Chev, say you're once again you're tuning at 30 hertz, you're not getting any room gain or cabin gain typically really after that. So 30 hertz is going to be almost your lowest point. You know, I'm not saying you're not getting any, okay, but I'm just saying you're not getting as much. And your subwoofer's unloading. By extending it down to 17 hertz or 20 hertz, now you can have the room pick that back up because you're only 3 decibels down. So your room will easily make that back up. And then you can also, once again, after 20 hertz, then you're going to have your unloading. So it helps you protect your driver further down as well. I don't know if any of that made sense.
No, I hope we get a good, clean recording of that, because that's a fountain of knowledge. So that's awesome. Miguel, thank you again for another super chat. I don't know what frequency that our trucks are going to peak at. I don't know the cabin frequency. I never tested for it, because I don't really, I got the SPL meter. It's mostly so I can, have a number to show you when I'm playing the subwoofers on a video. So I don't really do like that SPL find the peak kind of thing. As far as my current setup right now, of course, the backseat is gone from the truck. I took the backseat out about this time last year, and there's nothing in it. I just pulled the Savard quad box out after riding around for about a week and a half with that enclosure in the truck. And because I didn't like the way the box turned out from an aesthetic standpoint, the box is is destroyed at the moment. I went ahead and took it apart. So right now I've got nothing in the truck at the moment. So, and Miguel wants to see more car audio on your channel.
I know, and I'm going to tell Miguel what I think he should do to get his cabin frequency.
Tell me,
I have heard that the cabin frequency can change, but let me tell you what I would do. And some car audio guy might tell me to shove it, but I'll start with what I would do. I would take a sealed subwoofer. I don't care what subwoofer. Okay, doesn't matter. Any sealed subwoofer, and I would measure its frequency at the cone, like right at the cone. To get a baseline of what it's doing. Then
so like a full response. So like do a full measurement at the cone, like get one of the little measurement mics and some software and measure it right at the cone.
Yeah, get that cheap one that you have, the Dayton one that plugs into your USB-C. Yeah. Yep. Measure it at the cone, you'll get a flat response. Put it in the car. Measure again at wherever you're sitting. Okay. Take those measurements, put it in WinISD. Put a filter on and see where it's going. Where is and you can do that. You'll just do a Linkwitz transform on there. You'll be good to go. It'll show you where it's starting to pick up from. You'll figure out your resonant frequency fairly easily within a good range, at least. Now I've heard, and I don't know how true this is because I don't do a lot of car audio, that if you start playing really, really loud and the doors start shaking and the windows are, then your resonant frequency might change because you're now letting air out, which makes sense, but I've never tested that. And I wouldn't even be able to tell you how to test it.
Right. Because it'll change when you crack a window. It'll change when you open a door. Weird things happen inside of cars when the cabin's under pressure. So, all right, I got one here that was in the chat that I want to bring up because it's one that I thought about doing but didn't. And I would love to know your opinion on this rule of thumb. I've seen this rule of thumb floating around. The rule of thumb is mostly applies to car audio subwoofers, Nick. I'm curious about your thoughts on home audio. Let's say you got a 500 watt subwoofer. You need to throw 1,000 watts at that subwoofer. Wait a second. That's a different one. You need twice the power on your subs as the rest of the system. A completely different thing, but still a relevant rule of thumb. So if you have a 1,000 watt total system power, 2/3 of that power should be going for the subwoofer. So if you have 400 watts on your tweeters, you need 600 watts. 800 watts on your subs.
Yeah, I think this is stupid. But here's the reason why. I understand the rule of thumb, and I actually understand it more in car audio than home audio. Because car audio typically has very inefficient subwoofers. And so for inefficient subwoofers, you're probably going to need more power. Although I'm still confused with why there's so many inefficient subwoofers. I think now I think a lot of car audio could do more efficient subwoofers. I just think in car audio, we're used to seeing the high roll surrounds and the inefficient subwoofers. And for some reason we have in our head, if I get this 20,000 watts of power, this is so much better than having one that only needs 1,000 watts. And that's just not true. You can get the same SPL out of both depending on the sensitivity of the driver. We're going to talk about the actual sensitivity of the driver. Sensitivity has to do with how loud it'll get with 1 watt in it. And so, for example, if I have my 21-inch subwoofers, which I have in my theater, they can take up to 800 watts of power. I'm not giving them anywhere near that wattage, and I am shaking the whole house. So, but they're also like 98 decibel sensitive or something, right? So they only
All that
need
cone
like,
area, man. All that cone area.
yeah.
So
So
one thing you got to keep in mind with this, and I'd love to know your take on it, Nick. I need to get around to getting my stuff out and measuring this. A tweeter doesn't have to move much to make sound. They're very efficient and they play small wavelengths, so the diaphragm on the tweeter is not moving a lot. So you don't actually need a lot of power for your tweeters. I would say that if you've got a 50 watt by 4 amplifier in your car, unless you're just doing something insane in your car, that's more than enough power for your tweeter. I doubt that your tweeter ever gets that much power. Again,
that's
extreme
true.
SPL may be something different, but just a daily driver, why would you need more than 50 watts on a tweeter? A tweeter is never going to actually need that much power to get the job done.
You know, I like what these people are saying too. Like Stu said, this rule actually came from old school live sound, and then Trump Eats Cats also said you are sitting very close to front soundstage, does not need as much power. And there's a good point there. The further you're sitting away or the bigger the room has a great effect on how much power you need to give it. And for that matter, how many subs you need as well. So yeah, I think that's good. Now, everyone's saying, no, you need 10 times the amount of power, which I love that.
Cornet's got
some
right.
bass heads in here.
Cornet's got it right. 2K on the subs and 200 watts on the 10 to 1. You need 10 times the power on the subs than you have on the tweeters. I don't know. People who
some of that's personal preference, right?
That's true. Yeah. But it's funny because it was a good question, but I thought he was asking a different one. So I've got one here. It may
hold on. Can we talk about this real quick? Blake B said there's
Yes.
a few reasons for inefficient subs in car audio. And Blake B, he works for a car audio company, so he knows. So Hopkins iron law, high excursion, hertz efficiency, marketing and deficiencies in TS specs, right? See, for me, I feel like high sensitivity subs would be so much better in car audio because you don't have to worry about changing out your alternator. You don't have to worry about doing like all the, having an extra battery in the car, all these other things that a lot of people worry about. So for me, I think people could get away with a lot more PA style woofers, bigger ones, not 12-inch ones. Okay. Like I'm talking 15, probably 18 on up really. But I think you could probably get away with even in sealed boxes because you're going to get a lot of gain back. This is literally me just saying what I think. I have no experience with it, so take that for what it's worth. But I see a lot of advantages with that, with a car more than even a home. Don't you understand what I'm saying though? Because
I understand what you're saying. I understand. Back in the day, subs were more efficient and car audio power is cheaper. There was this, what do you call it? Two things evolved together. A predator changes to eat different prey or whatever. It's one of those things where as power got cheaper, subwoofers got less efficient and also able to handle more power. So, people seem to enjoy their car audio in the 1990s just fine. And a 1,000-watt amplifier was a big deal back then. And now everyone's got 2,000 watts and act like it's nothing.
It's true. I mean, power is much cheaper. You're right.
Is that true in home audio? Is power cheaper in home audio than it was in the 1990s?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, much cheaper. The biggest thing with home audio, if you're building your own subs, is getting an amplifier that will run full power. And what I mean by that is a lot of people are used to, having a plate amplifier that sticks on the back of their subwoofer. And nowadays in home theater, if you're running high power, you're going to be running probably a PA subwoofer. Oh, what's right. Miguel's there?
Miguel's got a question. Thank you again for another super chat, Miguel. We really appreciate the support. So he's got a question for you, Nick. Will I be better off buying 2 CT Sound 18s in a sealed box over 4 10-inch I'm guessing hippos in the truck? Let me know if good electrical is on point, high up alternator, etc.
So it'd be nice if you could send us the actual model numbers, because what we often talk about is volume displacement. right?
Mhm,
Typically the
mhm.
18s, by the way, the 18s over the 10s typically are going to be more efficient. Bigger, when we say
Bigger
efficient, we mean
cones.
sensitive. So more sensitive.
Right.
Yeah, bigger cones are more sensitive. We were talking, I was just talking about this the other day. It's kind of funny. So I'm putting drainage in my pond. Okay. I already put it in. But there's confusion on drainage or even TV size. When you
Mhm.
let's talk about drainage, and this directly equates to speakers. That's why I'm talking about it. Okay. When you talk about drainage in a system, you think 2 6-inch is equivalent to what? 1 12-inch. That's not true though. 4 6-inches are equivalent to 112. And same with a TV, right? 160-inch television. If you jump up to 120-inch television, that's not 2 60-inch television. That's 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So
Mhm.
you have 4. It's 4 times bigger. So a lot of people don't
Right.
realize that because they're like, I'm going to go to 120 from a 60-inch. Like, that's great, but that's a lot bigger than you think. And the same thing with this. So 4 10-inch subwoofers are not equivalent to a 40-inch subwoofer, but they are equivalent to one 20-inch subwoofer, basically. And the CT sounds is equivalent to what's half of 18, whatever half of
Yeah.
18. So not
Yeah.
like 27, something like that. I don't know. So
I've not just sat down and done the math yet, but I could sit down and crank it out in a second if I had the
yeah,
time to do it. But
so
yeah, so
somewhere in
as you
between.
yeah.
So Nate, yeah. So it's gonna be your 218s will output more, assuming the same X max than the 410s. So if
Assuming
you're
the same
going
X
for
max and assuming the same power.
same power handling, same X max efficiency, but really with the sensitivity of 18s, I would almost assume that the CT sounds, no matter what, would output more. So if you're going just total volume, and even if you're not going volume, I would still probably do the 218s because they should sound cleaner even at lower volumes.
And in my experience, an 18 is going to have more X max than a 10.
And they move so much more air. It's a different experience. It's a more visceral experience, in my opinion.
Hello,
I don't know
Nate.
about
Thank you for
I don't know about the electrical though. You'd have to ask Miguel about, or you'd have to ask Justin about the electrical.
So, yeah, the electrical, anything over 1,000 watts, in my opinion, you need to start upgrading your alternator. The alternator, I mean, people will add lithium batteries, but I think the alternator makes the power. And so you've got to upgrade the alternator first, in my opinion. And Nate, thank you for the super chat. Hope things are going well in Michigan.
So Nate, by the way, is on the forum and he created an entire build, an entire home theater using only my designs of speakers. And last I heard, he loves them. He's got 3 audience 212s in the front, 4 Cinema 10s in the rear. He actually built Cinema 10s and is like, man, I maybe I should just build all Cinema 10s because he's like, these sound so good. And then he put 4 of my Atmos in there. He did use different subwoofers, but that last I heard, he really, really loved them. So that's pretty cool. If you guys get a chance, though, you should check out that build. It's an amazing build. He did an awesome job on it.
All right. Looking to see if there's anything in the chat, questions that are worth talking about. Do you have any kind of car radio set up in your car, Nick? What are you rocking in your car?
Ooh, you guys would not believe me if I told you, but you've heard of Alpine. You know what their highest end is, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the status F1. Yeah.
Yeah. So think about that.
Uh-huh.
I'm running stock. I am all stock. And you know what? Actually, one of the cars we bought, I actually bought with sound quality in mind. It's actually a THX system designed by George Lucas. It's a Lincoln, and George actually, the people in THX, not necessarily George Lucas himself, did it. And it's a really good system, actually. Probably one of the best or better ones I've ever heard in a factory system, because they actually cared about the actual sound quality. And they even did tests like while driving it, without driving it, in wind tunnels. And So it's a really good system. The other one, my Nissan Pathfinder, it's terrible. It's awful. And I need to change it out, but I haven't done anything yet. It's a MKX, the SUV.
The SUV.
Lincoln MKX. Yeah.
Right. 218 sealed versus the 410 G2 Genesis on Assault 8. So Assault 8, it's a Sundown audio amplifier. That's a monster of an amplifier. You'll definitely need an upgraded alternator and lithium batteries to power that. I'm assuming you're getting rid of the back seat if you're going to fit 410s back there. And honestly, I mean, the only way to know which is going to be louder is to try it, but I would think 218s would be louder than 410s.
No,
and
218
I know there's
should
been
be
some
louder.
Yeah. Now, they're harder to fit in there. They're going to need more airspace. 218s probably take up a lot more airspace than a pair than 410s. So yeah,
I would go
kind of
with the Trop.
Curious to see how it turns out. I'd love to see some pictures when it's done.
Yeah, I would go with the Trop 18s. I'm with him. The CT Sounds Trop 18s is what I would do.
Yep. All right. Let's check for any more comments that we want to say about. So G code, sorry you're unhappy with your Atoto radio. I no longer recommend Atoto, and there aren't currently any of those generic no name brand Android head units that I recommend, because I also did not have a good experience with the Atoto, and others have different opinions.
Yeah. So here's the deal. I actually am with you with Atoto now. I've actually had a couple bad units lately, and I have stopped reviewing them on the channel. It's just weird because the first two that I had were awesome. I loved them. I did. I didn't have any issues with them at all. Then other people started saying that they had issues, and I'm like, and then you had an issue, and then I'm like, I don't want to recommend them. I mean, I had good experience with them, but if other people aren't, I don't want to keep recommending these. So one company that I have had really good success with to date is Enon, and I've had one in my car. I'd have to look to see when I reviewed it, but I feel like it's been over. I mean, it's been over a year. It might even been 2 years now. And I've had no issues with it at all. It just works. And so that one I've been pretty happy with, but I've only done one. So it's one of those, did I just get a really good one? I don't know. I have 2 more to test though. So maybe we'll get, I don't know, maybe I'll get more data on it. But unfortunately, when we test these, a lot of times, like Justin knows this, we have to go with limited data. And so if we've had a good experience with them for the time being, while we have them, then that's all we can go off of. But yeah, I agree. Once more people said they had issues with it, I stopped.
Same thing with the max speeding rods. I had several people message me that they had a problem with theirs. So it's like, I hate this. Nothing worse than when you review a product and it seems fine, someone has a bad experience. I'm glad yours is still working, man, because that's not fun when that happens. Like, I know, for example, that I gave a positive review to that Yanka 15, and Parker the Basshead just smoked one and, and said that it blew an underrated power on, according to him. So there's manufacturing tolerances and variances, and it's all like, oh no, I hope I'm not recommending a bad product, but I hate when someone has a bad experience, and I'm glad you had a good experience with the max speeding rods. A lot of people bought those, apparently. El Fuego, running stock in his 21 4Runner work truck until I make a trip to Hardco Stereo. So Cornut works there. I'd heard that. So I hear good things about his install skills. So well, cool. Let's see some pictures of it when it's done.
Yeah.
And thank you, El Fuego, for the super chat, and thank you for all the support that you give to the audio community. You make a difference, my friend.
Absolutely. And thank you earlier for all the thumbs up earlier. I do appreciate that.
All right, Nick, do you want to go over any more rules of thumb? I don't know how many we went over. I had more than 10. We're over our time limit. You got time for me? One more rule of thumb?
If you want to, otherwise we can save it for next week. Whatever you want to do.
I want to talk about it, I think, because someone mentioned it in the chat. Someone mentioned it.
Well, why did you ask?
Well, because I just wanted to be polite. I was going to put it up on the screen anyway. So Bandpass boxes should be 2-to-1. What in the world do we mean, Nick, when we say a Bandpass box should be 2-to-1?
So we went over this before the show because I'd never heard this before as well. And mainly because I don't build Bandpass boxes. and they're a lot more common in car audio than home audio. And Justin told me all about it, and I completely forgot everything he said. So you have to remind me.
So this rule of thumb is what you want to use if you just want something that's loud. If you're out there chasing a number. So the way this works, the smaller side in this 2-to-1 ratio is the sealed side, and the larger number is the ported side. So a fourth order bandpass enclosure, what people call a fourth order bandpass. So we got some thumbs down on this rule of thumb. What I find is when you follow this rule of thumb, you end up with a box that's peaky and boomy and loud. And if you were doing like an SPL contest, go for it. Go 3-to-1, because the bigger the ported side gets, the louder it's going to get. So the sealed side controls what frequency you peak at. The ported side's going to control how loud you get. So yeah, Blake's saying you can go 4-to-1 in some subwoofers. So it's all about what you're trying to get. I tend to like more of a sound quality. The only bandpass I ever built, I did a 1-to-1. And I was really impressed with the output and the sound. In fact, it was one of those GRS 12s, the really cheap one. So I don't know. It's a rule of thumb people throw out, but I don't think it's the best way to design a bandpass enclosure. I think that you need to just download WinISD and tinker around with it and look at the frequency response and pick something you think works.
Yeah.
All right.
Since we did that one, I feel like we owe it to people to do the passive radiator one as well.
All right, let me find it here on my magic little. Let's do the passive radiator one. Here we go. Y'all know this one if you've hung out with us at all. You need 2 passive radiators. You got to have 2 of them on there, Nick. This is the rule of thumb.
So passive radiator is another way to tune a box. We usually notice it looks just like a normal subwoofer or woofer, depending on what you're tuning. And they have no motor system on it. And that's how you tune the box. You use weight on it and you tune the box like that. And this is one of those rules of thumb that I don't necessarily hate, but it's not necessarily completely true either. And so what they're saying is if you have one active woofer of 12 inches, you need 2 passive radiators of equal size, 12 inches, to be able to offset that. And that's usually a good rule of thumb, but unfortunately, especially with high excursion drivers, this can be very dangerous. And the reason why I say that is if you have a very high excursion driver and your passive radiators are low excursion, 2 of those passive radiators probably aren't even going to be enough. And there's going to be some instances where 1 passive radiator is more than enough, because we're not really talking about the cone area. We're talking about volume displacement. You actually want 2 times volume displacement. And why don't you, Justin, tell us how we calculate volume displacement?
Well, you take the surface area of the cone, which like a 10-inch subwoofer has a surface area that's smaller than 10 inches. So you want to measure from middle of the surround to middle of the surround, and you use the area of a circle to find the surface area. Probably need to convert that to metric units, because we think of subwoofers in terms of freedom units, but we need metric units for this because our X max is in millimeters, which you can convert to centimeters. Typically. It's in metric units. So you're just going to multiply and pay close attention to the units so you don't botch the units. The X max, right, the one-way excursion by the surface area, the SD of the cone, and that's going to tell you how much volume the subwoofer can displace when it makes a full stroke from neutral, resting all the way out to its X max and all the way back. And people will point out that passives don't have an X max. Technically, it's X mech, I think, the mechanical limits. So your passive radiators need to be able to do double of the volume displacement of your active driver. So if that active driver pushes out 10 millimeters of an X max and you've got 2 identical sized cones, they both need 10 millimeters of X max. Or maybe you've got a 10-inch active and you can pair it with a 12-inch passive and it's big enough to do that. That's what I did. I used an Ultimax, a 10-inch Ultimax, and one of the 12-inch designer series, the aluminum cones. No, I forget what series they were, the aluminum cones. So that
Yeah,
12
that's
worked
design
great
choice.
with that 10. You've got to be able to do double the volume displacement. That's the actual rule of thumb. And you want to follow that one. You want to stick with that. That one works.
That's the actual rule. Yeah. And so you're going to want at least double the volume displacement or more. And sometimes that's not true. Sometimes you can get away with a little bit less. It depends on how you're tuning it and how much power you're giving it as well.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're usually giving it max power, you're going to want double the volume displacement or more. And I did a whole video on passive radiators probably about a month ago. You can check my channel under videos, go to most recent, and you'll see it's a blue. I think it's a blue picture with the passive radiator on it. And you could learn all about passive radiators. I talk about tuning. I talk about this rule of thumb. There's a lot in there. And I think in general, this is one of those ones that gets confused because passive radiators just don't get talked about enough. And even though they're not new, it seems like people are just now starting to use them, which makes them feel new.
Mm-hmm. They've been
I don't know.
Forever. Kicker's
they've
been
around.
putting passive radiator in truck boxes as long as I've been alive, quite literally my entire lifetime. So that's a long ass time, y'all.
But I think being able to get our hands on passive radiator is, as far as DIYers, is relatively new, because I remember when Parts Express didn't really have any, and then they only had like 3 or 4 on there, and now they have a ton. And then there's a couple other ones that have it too. Wait, you can use an actual. Oh, all right. Okay, let's answer Stu's question. Can we do that?
What is Stu's question? I didn't see it.
I've heard that you can use an actual sub unhooked as a passive radiator. What would happen if you shorted the positive and negative terminals on the passive radiator in this case? First of all, anytime you have a driver not hooked up, it will act as some type of port in some way, shape, or form, right? But it doesn't really act just like a passive radiator because you still have all of your motor structure still in there fighting it, right? So passive radiator doesn't want any of that motor structure. I'm not saying it doesn't have any type of compliance, but it's different than what we're talking about. Now, interestingly enough, for those that care, passive radiator, and you can make your own passive radiators, and you could use 2 of them by buying 3 of the exact same subwoofer. So say you bought 3 of the exact same subwoofer and then cut off the motor structure. You can make your own passive radiator like that. In fact, that's how passive radiators are actually made when they're made for that particular subwoofer. It uses everything the same, except they take the motor structure off, and that's it. And then you might have to tune it with some weight, but that's it. So if you had some cheap subwoofers and you wanted to make your own passive radiators, that's how you do it. And if you want to know how to tune a passive radiator, I actually did some videos on how to do that. You can use DATs. You can use some rice at home. And you can use actually, there's a couple different ways to do it. I went over like 3 or 4 different ways to do it, but you could do it.
All right.
But it would not work the same as an actual passive radiator per se, unless you cut the motor off.
All right. I think that's a good one. So, Nick, here's the next question I've got for you then. The next rule of thumb. The rule of thumb is we're supposed to drop a YouTube video every single week. So what do you got coming up on your channel, Nick?
Well, I still have that 3D printed enclosure video. I did not get out. I had some issues with that video, and some of my patrons know this, but unfortunately, I was trying to actually take some more video of it. I bought 4 of these BMR drivers. I have 3 right here, and you're gonna know why. All 4 of these actually came bad, kind of. When you can, and you'll see it in the video in the measurements. And I was contemplating whether to take the good one out of the other speaker and put it in, but I actually can't get the driver out of the 3D printed one now, so it's just gonna have to stay that way. So
sometimes things just go sideways, man. That's just part of life. I mean, that's just how it goes.
And so basically, to make a long story short, we have a dip at 10 kilohertz, which is not anything to do with the 3D printed one. It has to do with all 4 of these. Me and another guy actually contacted Tectonic about it, and they're like, yeah, that shouldn't be measuring like that. Measures in free air, everything. I wanted to get it so that it measured identical across the board. I just can't do it. So I'm going to get the video out anyway. So that will be coming out. The other video that's coming out is I have a video on coming out right now. I'm going to do a couple more on CES 2024. You may or may not care about them, but I think those that will care about them will like them. I went and met with 4Movie, which is a projector company that a lot of people are going crazy over. And I met with Brian from projectorscreen.com. Great guy, great resource. If you go to their website, they actually tell you what projector is good with what screen and what situation. So if you're interested in that type of stuff, pretty cool guy. And one of the nicest guys I've ever met. Just really cool guy. So I'm going to get that out, maybe a couple other ones. 2 other videos that I have coming out, not necessarily today or tomorrow, but coming out soon. I did get the new Creality K1C, so I'll be reviewing that. And then I also got a new projector. This is going to be coming out next Friday, probably, I think 19th. It fits in the sides of your hand, and it's a little laser projector. It's a portable by a company called Dangbei. It's really cool. It's really cool, actually.
Dang,
it's pretty sweet.
Cool.
So I like it. So, if you're interested in those types of things, I got that stuff going on. You?
Awesome. Well, I just finished the last video in the Savard 6.5 quad box build, and the story of the video, and I shared this with my patrons before I made the videos. I wasn't happy with the way the box looked. I thought it was ugly. It didn't have the look I was going for. Several people commented after the video and said they thought it looked fine. So I appreciate that, but I didn't like the way it looked. And something that my friend Stu told me about that I completely forgot about and will never forget about now. I put some of that red glazing putty stuff, Bondo putty, on the box to try to fill in some nail holes just to try it and see what happens. Exo Hide and Duratex don't stick to that. And
because they're water based.
Yeah, they don't stick to it. And so I as it's peeling off, I'm sitting there going, Stu told me this wasn't going to work. So I just had forgotten he'd said that. And I sent him a picture and it's like, yeah, there you go, Stu. You told me. I should have just remembered that. So hopefully if you ever want to use that stuff on a box, just don't put the Duratex or the Exo Hide on there. And I was frustrated, and I took the Sawzall to the box because I was mad at it, and it's now piled in the backyard waiting for it to get dry so I can cover it with lighter fluid and get some firecrackers and have a good time with it. So
what I found is really good on those, sorry, as an aside, what I found is really good is actual real Bondo. In fact, I just built my kids a Lego table, and it's 2 pieces of MDF on top of each other. And you know how it's so hard to hide that seam going right down the middle,
so
right?
Bondo hid the seam. Did it take paint?
Bondo sanded it down. Oh, yeah. It took paint beautifully. So I'm starting to, and it's going to be a hard surface in the end, right? It's going to fill in the crack, and also it's not going to flex. So I don't know. I like the idea of using that Bondo.
So I'm going to get back to working on Savard stuff. This is the design for the next box I'm going to do. This is going to be for a pair of the Savard Wrath 8s. And eventually the goal is to have like a shootout video down the road one day. But I've got the box design laid out. I think I've got all the MDF. I'm going to do MDF. I think I've got all the wood that I need out in the garage. So I should be able just to get to it when I get some time. I've had a bunch of extra stuff to do at the day job, the ability to build boxes. But hopefully I'll get this one going. So,
yeah, well, that seems like a good reason not to get it going.
All right. So I think that's it. We've told a story and off we go. So I think it's time to say goodbye, Nick.
Bye.